I'm Revis, and today I am sharing with you all my initial thoughts on the August 3rd OTA. So this OTA was all buffs, which is interesting, and I'm just going to quickly go through, pretty much give my thoughts on how this is going to impact any meta decks, as well as just what changes these are at all. Is it a good change? Is it a bad change? Is it impactful? Is it going to push the needle for any of these, right? So I ordered them in what I believe would be the least impactful to the most impactful, and so I'm just gonna run through them, and also shout out some decks where I think they'll be good. So first we have Hawkeye. The only change here is instead of gaining +2 power when you play, you gain +3. So this is 1 power bonus payoff. So instead of being a 1/3, you're getting a 1/4. This doesn't push the needle at all. It's better in bounce, and now you can play in Cerebral 4, but the payoff is so small for something that dies to Killmonger and requires setup that it's not worth running. It was unplayable before, it's still borderline unplayable now. I do like that they are trying out a change here though. So let's move on to the next one. Next we have HulkBuster. This was a stat increase from 3/4 to 3/5. This is definitely a much better stat line. This is comparable to something like Polaris if you just play it by itself and not considering the ability. Definitely a lot stronger in the decks where you're already considering playing it, which is your move decks and your Deadpool decks. But I think it's pretty unlikely to push needles for those decks. Those decks are kind of very reliant on certain combos anyways using HulkBuster, and this doesn't really help it too much, right? You need an empty lane to play it in as well, but it's now a much stronger consideration in those decks. Third, we have the Vision. We have a stat increase from 5/7 to 5/8. This was already a borderline playable deck, playable card, but really only saw play on Shuri where you can multiply the power, and you didn't really have any other cards to get into unreachable locations. 5/8, all of a sudden premium stat line. I can play this outside of Shuri. Obviously, it's much better in Shuri as well, but now all of a sudden I'm actually considering it in my Lockjaw decks. Before I was taking it out, and I was even playing cards like Legion over it to get into these hard to get locations, purely because Legion has premium stats, right? It's the highest power you can get that you're not Shang-Chi'd at. So, but yeah, that as well. It's also a much better inclusion in Shuri still. It's now 16 power that can move around, which is pretty awesome. Love this change. Next, we have another change to the 5-cost move card. So this is Captain Marvel. Rather than purely seeing a stat increase, she actually got brought down a mana cost to 4 mana, and as well as losing a stat point. Which is really good. Losing only 1 stat point to be a mana cheaper is really, really good. And another thing to consider as well is 4 cost is one of those breakpoints where it's able to be Zabu'd. So now all of a sudden I'm playing a 3-cost Captain Marvel that moves. It can get into storm locations, can get into Sanctum, and I can run it in my Zabu deck. I can fit it much easier into my Lockdown deck, but it's really solid in the Dark Hawk list over something like Doctor Doom, which was seeing play in the list. Really, that's just a good hit from Lad, right? I would much rather play a Hawk and a Captain Marvel on turn 6 rather than a Doctor Doom on turn 6. So I think this will make Dark Hawk much, much better than it is already, which is a little bit scary. One thing to remember if you're running Iron Lad in this is that multiple Marvels don't check together, so they're going to check individually. They're not both going to ever move to one location to win you that location. So that's definitely something to consider, because she is also a very good hit off of Iron Lad. Lastly, we have what I think will be the biggest change. We have Absorbing Man, who gained 2 stats and lost no ability. It's almost at rate now. I would consider at rate for a 4-drop being a 4/6, right? So like Iron Lad, it's vanilla 4/6. You don't feel bad playing it. You feel a little bit bad if you play Absorbing Man without any on reveals, but now if you get even a really small on reveal, all of a sudden it's way better. So you're probably including this in any deck with strong on reveals. Once again, I think it's going to be really good in Dark Hawk. It's Rock Slide level. It's literally just a second Rock Slide. It's a 4/5 Rock Slide. It's a 4/5 Shang-Chi. It's an extra Enchantress. All of a sudden you can play it with like getting a Lad off of hitting Doctor Doom, and then you can follow up with this, which would be a second Doctor Doom. You could probably throw some other on reveals at the beginning here. One thing that I would be very curious to check out, and what's probably also going to be a good deck with this, is going to be a Silver Surfer. So you could run like a Zabu Silver Surfer with Wonk all of a sudden. And Absorbing Man already copies a ton of stuff like Silver Surfer in there. Um, but more importantly, it can copy a Brood. So you can go Brood into Absman, and all of a sudden you're getting a 15 power lane, and that's not including the extra Surfer buff that you can do on the Broodlings. And that's just like a ton of power that you can add to that deck, which it really needs. Surfer struggles a lot of the time with power, relies more on the tech card cheesing to do the same thing. So I'd be very, very curious to try out like a Zabu Surfer build, maybe throwing in Rogue to beat your Darkhawks. I think this is going to be a change that might shake up the meta a bit, but mostly it's just going to make Darkhawk better. And yeah, I'd be curious to see. I've a Silver Surfer deck with like Iron Lad and Absorbing Man and Zabu, and maybe running Brood and Mr. Sinisters because they're good hits off of the Lad as well, and just filling the lanes with a ton of power. That might be really fun. But yeah, these are the changes. Overall, I think they're very good, and you should go experiment with them now.